The walk into Haven took about 20 minutes, and every step of it made the Valori team more uncomfortable. Not because anything was threatening, but because everything was so impossibly well built. The streets were clean and paved with a smooth composite material. The buildings were solid, made from local stone, reinforced with fabricated metal alloys. Some were tall, 5 or 6 stories high, with wide windows that caught the sunlight. Others were lower, with flat roofs covered in green plants and small gardens. Water flowed through narrow channels along the edges of the roads, feeding into a drainage system that Viden quietly noted was more efficient than anything on most collective worlds. People moved through the streets with purpose. Men and women carried tools, pushed carts, walked in and out of shops and workshops. Children ran between market stalls, laughing and chasing each other. A group of teenagers sat under a tree, reading from thin handheld screens. An old woman sold fruit from a wooden stand, calling out prices in a loud, cheerful voice. It did not look like a survival colony. It looked like a home. A real one. Ethan Cole brought them to a building near the center of the city, overlooking the harbor. It was not the largest building in Haven, and it was not the most impressive. It was practical, well-maintained, and modest, which, as Theiss would come to learn, said a great deal about the kind of people who ran this place. Inside, they were met by a woman in her late 50s. She had sharp brown eyes, silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a simple knot, and the kind of face that looked like it had smiled a lot, but could turn serious in an instant. She wore plain clothes, a dark jacket over a gray shirt, sturdy boots, no jewelry or decoration of any kind. "Governor Laura Beckett," she said, extending her hand. When Theiss did not take it, not knowing what the gesture meant, Beckett pulled it back with an easy smile. "Old Earth custom. Do not worry about it. Please, come in. Sit down." She led them into a simple meeting room with a long wooden table, chairs, and windows that looked out over the harbor. She poured cups of a hot dark liquid she called coffee and offered them to her guests. The Valori politely declined. Beckett shrugged and drank from her own cup with obvious enjoyment. "So," Beckett said, sitting down across from them, "you have questions." "Many," Theiss said, "starting with how your people came to be on this world." Beckett nodded. She leaned back in her chair and told them the story. 212 years ago, a colony ship called the Starbound had launched from Earth. It carried 12,000 people, families, engineers, scientists, doctors, farmers, soldiers, teachers, all bound for a planet in a system called Kepler 442, where long-range scans had suggested conditions might support human life. The Starbound used an experimental faster-than-light drive. It was new technology, not fully tested, and humanity was desperate to expand beyond its home system. The drive worked, for a while. Then something went wrong. A failure in the navigation system threw the ship thousands of light-years off course, deep into a part of the galaxy no human had ever visited. When the crew woke up from cryosleep, they found themselves in orbit around this planet. The drive was destroyed. The communication systems could not reach Earth at that distance. They had enough supplies to last maybe 2 years if they were careful. Below them was a world of fire, poison, and death. Most species in that situation would have accepted the end, Beckett said calmly. Humans are not most species. The first generation had it the worst. They stayed inside the sealed compartments of the Starbound, while teams in heavy environmental suits went down to the surface. They drilled into the volcanic rock to reach the geothermal energy underneath. They set up atmospheric processors to begin cleaning the toxic air. They planted engineered bacteria in the soil to start breaking down the poisons and building something that could eventually support crops. It was brutal, dangerous work. People died. Equipment broke down faster than it could be repaired. Food ran short. Diseases spread through the cramped living quarters of the ship. There were days, Beckett said, when the first generation must have wondered if they were fighting a war they could never win. But they kept going. 40 years. That was how long it took before the air was clean enough for a person to walk outside without a suit. 40 years of living inside a metal shell on a world that was trying to kill them every single day. 40 years of choosing, again and again, to not give up. Fis tried to imagine it. 40 years trapped inside a ship, raising children who had never seen an open sky, burying friends in recycled coffins, and still waking up every morning to do the work. She could not imagine it. No Valori could. No Valori would have lasted 5 years in those conditions, let alone 40. The second generation built the first surface structures, Beckett continued. The third generation planted the first real forests and engineered the freshwater river systems. The fourth generation built this city. She gestured out the window at Haven, the rooftops, the harbor, the green hills beyond. Now we are in the seventh generation. Our population is nearly 90,000. We grow our own food. We manufacture our own tools, vehicles, and weapons. We have hospitals, schools, libraries, and research laboratories. We have a military that can defend this planet against any threat we can imagine. She paused and looked directly at Thys. We have had no contact with Earth, no resupply ships, no rescue missions, no help from anyone. Everything you see, every building, every road, every tree, every breath of clean air on this planet, we made it ourselves. The room was quiet. Viden's mandibles had stopped clicking. Kale was sitting completely still. Even Pella, the cultural specialist who was trained to remain neutral in all situations, looked shaken. Fis finally spoke. Governor Beckett, do you understand what you are telling us? In the recorded history of the Valori Collective, thousands of years of exploring this galaxy, we have never encountered a species that could terraform a Class 9 death world. We have never encountered a species that could build what you have built, under the conditions you faced, in the time you did it. Beckett looked at her steadily. I understand. It should not be possible. Beckett smiled. It was a small, tired, proud smile, the kind of smile worn by a woman who carried the weight of 200 years of impossible survival on her shoulders. Commander, she said, we are human. We do not really care what should or should not be possible. We just care about what needs to be done. She finished her coffee, set the cup down, and stood up. Now, would you like to see the rest of our city? I think your engineer friend over there is going to lose his mind when he sees our power grid. She nodded toward Viden, who had been quietly scanning the building's energy systems on his device, and had gone very pale. Thys looked at her team. Viden was pale. Kale was tense. Pella was writing notes so fast her hands were shaking. Yes, Thys said quietly. I think we would like that very much. Beckett led them out of the building, and into the streets of Haven. The sun was warm. The air smelled like salt and green things growing. Somewhere in the distance, a bell was ringing, and children were laughing. And Thys walked through it all, thinking the same thought, over and over again. What have we found? What have we found? The tour of Haven lasted 3 full days, and each day was worse than the last, not because anything bad happened, but because every new thing the Valori saw made them realize just how badly they had underestimated human beings. On the first day, Governor Beckett took them to the geothermal complex on the eastern ridge. The facility was built into the side of a volcanic mountain, with massive pipes running deep into the planet's mantle. The chief engineer, a stocky man in his 40s, named Danny Marsh, met them at the main entrance with grease on his hands and a wide, friendly grin. Welcome to the engine room, Marsh said, wiping his palms on his work pants. This is where we keep the lights on. He walked them through the facility, explaining each system in plain, simple language. The plant tapped directly into underground magma channels, drawing heat and converting it into electrical power through a series of turbines. The technology was not elegant. It was rough, practical, and built from whatever materials the colonists could find or make. But it worked. It worked incredibly well. "This site alone puts out about 18 terawatts," Marsh said, tapping a display panel. "We have got 6 more plants like this across the continent." Cale did the math quietly. 126 terawatts of geothermal power from a single planet. Most collective colony worlds produced a fraction of that using fusion reactors and solar arrays. These humans, working with nothing but volcanic rock and their own stubbornness, were generating more energy than civilizations that had been spacefaring for thousands of years. Vidin pulled this aside when Marsh was not looking. "Commander, their energy output is not just impressive, it is dangerous. With this much power, they could run weapons platforms, orbital defense systems, and manufacturing plants capable of producing a fleet. They have the energy budget of a military power, and they are using it to run farms and hospitals." "For now," Thys said. On the second day, they visited the biofabrication laboratories. Dr. Nora Hale, a slim, quiet woman with careful hands and eyes that missed nothing, led them through a complex of clean, well-lit rooms filled with growing tanks, genetic sequencing equipment, and rows of experimental crops. "When the first generation landed, nothing on this planet could support human life," Hale explained. "The soil was toxic, the water was acid, the air would burn your lungs. So we changed everything. We engineered bacteria to clean the soil. We modified our crops to grow in conditions that would kill normal plants. We built new strains of wheat, corn, and rice from the ground up." She showed them samples. Thick-stalked grain that grew twice as fast as anything on Earth. Protein cultures that could feed a family from a container the size of a shoebox. And fruit trees that had been modified to produce year-round in the planet's unusual climate. "We also solved most human diseases," Hale added, almost as an afterthought. "Cancer, heart disease, neurological decay. The 4th generation cracked those. Our average lifespan is about 120 years now." Pella, the cultural specialist, finally broke her professional silence. 120 years? The average Valori lives 93 years, and we have had advanced medicine for millennia. Hale looked at her with a polite but completely unapologetic expression. "We had strong motivation to figure things out quickly. When you are alone on a death world, you cannot afford to lose people to things you can prevent." It was on the 3rd day that things got truly unsettling. Beckett took them to the military district on the southern edge of the city, where Colonel Sam Pruitt was waiting. Pruitt was a lean man in his early 50s, with short gray hair, a thin scar running along his jaw, and the kind of quiet stillness that made Cale, a trained Valori security officer, immediately recognize him as extremely dangerous. Pruitt was polite and professional. He answered every question directly. He hid nothing. And that somehow made everything worse. Haven maintained a standing military force of about 4,000 soldiers, with another 12,000 citizens trained as reserve fighters. Every person over the age of 16 received basic combat training, weapons handling, first aid, tactical movement, and survival skills. "We hoped we would never need any of this," Pruitt said as he led them through the training grounds, where squads of soldiers ran drills with smooth, practiced precision. "But hope is not a strategy. Our founders landed on a world that wanted them dead, with no idea what else might be out there. So they trained, and we have never stopped." The armory was where Vidin's composure finally cracked. The plasma sidearms the patrol had carried were the standard-issue weapon, the baseline. Beyond those, the armory held directed energy rifles, accurate at over 2 kilometers, portable shield generators that could stop both physical and energy-based attacks, heavy weapons platforms that could be assembled in the field in under 10 minutes, and autonomous defense drones that patrolled the city perimeter around the clock. And then there was the silo. Pruitt led them underground, through reinforced corridors, past security checkpoints staffed by soldiers who watched the aliens with calm, unblinking attention. At the bottom, in a chamber carved from solid rock, sat a single missile. It was not large. It was about 3 meters long, smooth, and simple in design. But the energy readings coming off it made Viden's scanner emit a warning tone he had never heard before. "We call it the deterrent," Pruitt said. "It is a concentrated plasma warhead designed to be launched from the surface. It can reach orbit in under 90 seconds. On impact, it delivers enough focused energy to crack the hull of any known class of starship." The room was very quiet. "You built an anti-orbital weapon," Fiss said slowly. "Yes," Pruitt said. "From scratch." "Yes. On a planet that was molten rock 200 years ago." Pruitt looked at her with those steady, calm eyes. "We built everything from scratch, Commander. This was just one more problem to solve." Fiss turned to Beckett, who was standing near the back of the room with her arms folded. The governor's face was unreadable. "Governor," Fiss said, "you have weapons that can destroy starships. You have an energy grid that could power a war fleet. You have soldiers trained to a level that matches or exceeds collective standards. And you have done all of this in complete isolation, with no help, on a planet that should have been your grave." Beckett met her eyes. "That is correct. Why are you showing us all of this? Why are you not hiding it?" Beckett unfolded her arms and took a slow breath. "Because we are not interested in tricks or secrets, Commander. We have spent 200 years being honest with ourselves about what this world is and what we need to do to survive on it. We are not going to start lying now, just because someone finally showed up." She paused. "And because I want you to understand something. We did not build these weapons because we want to fight. We built them because we had to be ready in case someone came here looking for a fight. There is a difference." That night, back on the quiet hymn, the contact team sat in the briefing room, and nobody spoke for a long time. Kale broke the silence first. "They are not a lost colony. They are a fortress world, and they built it with their bare hands." Viden was staring at his data, his mandibles moving slowly. "Their weapons technology is ahead of ours in at least 3 key areas. Their energy production is beyond anything we predicted a species of their age could achieve. Their medical science has surpassed ours, and they have been alone for 2 centuries. He looked up at this. "Commander, I need to say something and I need you to hear it clearly. If this is what humans can do when they are stranded and forgotten on the worst planet in the galaxy, with no resources and no allies, what are they going to be capable of when they are not alone, when they have support, when they have numbers?" Fiss had been staring out the viewport at the planet below, the green continents, the blue oceans, the lights of Haven glowing softly in the dark. "I do not know," she said, "and that is what scares me." She turned away from the window and headed to the communications console. It was time to call the High Council. They needed to know what was down there. They needed to know what humanity was. The response from the Valori High Council came within hours of Fiss's report. It was short, direct, and carried the kind of urgency that Fiss had never seen from the normally slow-moving government. A full diplomatic delegation was being dispatched immediately, accompanied by a military escort of 12 warships. The Council was not taking any chances. 3 weeks later, the fleet arrived. 12 Valori warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel and took up positions in orbit around Haven's planet. They were the most powerful ships in the Collective's navy, each one armed with enough firepower to reduce a continent to glass. Together, they represented a force that had brought dozens of species to the negotiating table over the centuries. Ethan Cole, standing on the walls of Haven's outer perimeter, looked up at the new lights in the sky and let out a low whistle. "That is a lot of ships," he said to Pruitt, who stood beside him. Pruitt studied the formation with narrowed eyes. 12 capital ships. Standard intimidation pattern. He was quiet for a moment. They are scared. Good, Cole said. Scared people negotiate. It is the confident ones you have to worry about. The lead ship carried High Counselor Raneth, the most senior member of the collective's governing body. He was very old, ancient even by Valori standards. His wings were thin and fragile with age, and his compound eyes had a milky quality to them. But his mind was sharp, and he had spent over a century managing the collective's expansion across the galaxy. He had met hundreds of alien leaders. He had negotiated treaties, ended wars, and reshaped the political map of known space. He descended to the surface in a gilded shuttle, accompanied by a team of advisors, translators, and guards. Beckett met him at the landing site with the same calm, practical manner she had shown Thys. She wore the same plain clothes. She offered the same steady handshake. She did not try to impress him, and she did not try to appear smaller than she was. Beside her stood her senior staff, Pruitt, Hale, Marsh, and a young woman named Katie Grant, who served as Haven's newly appointed diplomatic liaison. Grant was 28 years old. She had grown up in Haven, studied history and language, and had a natural ability to read people that bordered on unsettling. Within 5 minutes of meeting Raneth, she had adjusted the way she stood, the speed at which she spoke, and the level of eye contact she made, all to match the patterns that made Valori feel comfortable and respected. Thys noticed. It sent a chill through her. These humans did not just build machines and weapons. They studied people. They adapted to social situations the way water adapted to the shape of a container. Naturally, quickly, and completely. Raneth spent 5 days in Haven. Beckett showed him everything, just as she had shown Thys. He visited the power plants, the farms, the laboratories, and the military installations. But he also went places the first contact team had not been taken. He visited the schools, where children as young as 5 were learning mathematics, science, reading, and art. He watched a class of 12-year-olds debate the ethics of resource distribution with a sophistication that would have impressed collective university students. He saw teenagers building small machines in workshop classes, their hands steady and their eyes focused. He visited the hospital, where doctors treated patients with technology they had invented themselves. He watched a surgeon repair a damaged heart using a procedure that Valori medicine had not yet developed. He stood in the recovery ward and saw patients sitting up in bed, talking to their families, eating meals, and laughing. He attended a town council meeting where ordinary citizens stood up and argued about water rights, building permits, and park maintenance. They disagreed loudly. They interrupted each other. They waved their hands and raised their voices. And then they voted, shook hands, and went home. It was messy, noisy, and completely functional. On the evening of the 4th day, Raneth sat alone in his guest quarters and stared at the ceiling for a very long time. On the 5th day, he requested a private meeting with Beckett. They sat across from each other in Beckett's office, the same simple room where she had first met Thys. The window was open, and the sound of the harbor drifted in on the warm breeze. "Governor," Raneth said, "I am going to be direct with you. My government is afraid of your people." Beckett nodded slowly. "I appreciate you saying that plainly, Counselor. Please understand our position," he continued, folding his thin, aged hands together. "The Valori Collective has existed for thousands of years. We have explored hundreds of star systems. We have met many species. Some were primitive, a few were advanced. Not one in all our long history has done what your people have done." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "You were thrown onto a world that should have killed every single one of you. You had no support, no allies, no technology beyond what you carried on one ship. And in 200 years, you built a civilization that matches ours in some areas and surpasses it in others. You did this alone. Yes, Beckett said simply. The question that my government cannot stop asking, the question that keeps our counselors awake at night, is this. Raneth leaned forward slightly. What happens next? What happens when you are no longer alone? What happens when you reach your homeworld and reconnect with the rest of your species? You started with 12,000 people on a dead rock. There are billions of humans on Earth. Billions more on your colony worlds. If 12,000 of you could do this, what will billions of you do? The office was very quiet. Outside, a seabird called somewhere over the water. Beckett looked at him for a long time. Then she stood up and walked to the window. She looked out at Haven, the city her great-great-great-grandparents had dreamed of while they were trapped inside a dying ship on a world of fire. The city that 7 generations of stubborn, exhausted, brilliant, ordinary people had pulled out of nothing. Counselor, she said, still looking out the window, let me tell you something about my people. We did not survive this world because we are warriors. We did not survive because we are smarter than everyone else, or tougher, or more ruthless. We survived because when everything falls apart, when the situation is completely hopeless and every logical reason says to give up, we do not give up. We just do not. It is not a choice we make. It is who we are. She turned back to face him. You are right to take us seriously. Any species that looks at what we have built here and does not take us seriously is making a mistake. But you are wrong to be afraid of us. We did not spend 200 years building a home so we could go out and destroy someone else's. Raneth studied her face. And if someone comes here to take what you have built, if someone threatens your people? Something changed in Beckett's expression. It was subtle, a slight tightening around the eyes, a hardness in the jaw, a stillness that had nothing to do with calm, and everything to do with something much older and much more dangerous. In that single moment, Raneth saw it. He saw what was underneath the polite smiles and the practical clothing and the warm hospitality. He saw the thing that had carried 12,000 people through 40 years of living hell. He saw the thing that had turned a planet of death into a world of life. It was not hope. It was not courage. It was something harder than both of those things. It was the absolute, unshakable certainty that they would do whatever it took to protect what was theirs. Whatever it took. No limits, no hesitation, no mercy for anyone who forced them to that point. Then they will learn, Beckett said softly, why we survived. Raneth held her gaze for a long moment. Then he looked away. He suddenly felt very tired and very old. He had negotiated with warlords, dictators, and conquerors across the galaxy. None of them had ever frightened him the way this quiet woman in plain clothes had just frightened him. The dictators fought for control. The conquerors fought for glory. These humans fought for their children, for their home, for each other. And Raneth knew, with the certainty of someone who had lived a very long life, that there was nothing in the galaxy more dangerous than that. Raneth returned to his flagship and spent 2 days in private meetings with his advisors. The debate was intense. Some counselors wanted to contain Haven, place it under collective oversight, limit its growth, control its technology. Others wanted to withdraw entirely and pretend they had never found it. Raneth dismissed both options. Contain them? He said during the final session. With what? They have weapons that can destroy our ships from the surface. They have the energy to power a fleet. They have 90,000 people who have spent their entire lives preparing for exactly the kind of fight we would be starting. And they are humans. Even if we won, which I am not confident we would, they would not stop. They would rebuild. They would come back. They always come back. That is the one thing every species in this galaxy should have learned about humans by now. He shook his head slowly. No, we do not fight them. We do not try to control them. We do something much smarter. What? His chief advisor asked. Raneth looked at him with those old, clouded eyes. We stand beside them, before someone else does. The Valori Collective offered Haven a formal alliance, full diplomatic recognition, technology sharing, trade agreements, mutual defense, and most importantly, access to the Collective's faster-than-light communication network, a system capable of sending messages across the galaxy in hours rather than centuries. For the first time in 212 years, Haven could talk to Earth. When Beckett announced the news, the city went quiet for a moment. Then it went loud. People poured into the streets. They hugged each other, cried, laughed, and stood in shocked silence, staring up at the sky, as if expecting to see Earth looking back at them. The broadcast was scheduled for the following evening. Danny Marsh spent 30 straight hours rigging the city's power grid to boost the signal. Katie Grant worked with Viden to calibrate the Collective's communication equipment for human frequencies. Nora Hale closed her lab early and took her young daughter, Lily, for a walk along the harbor, telling her the story of Earth, the blue planet, the green continents, the billions of people who had no idea that 12,000 of their own had survived on the other side of the galaxy. Sam Pruitt did what he always did. He checked the perimeter defenses, reviewed the duty roster, and made sure every soldier was at their post. When his second-in-command asked him if he was going to watch the broadcast, Pruitt said, "I will watch it from the wall. Somebody has to keep an eye on things." His second smiled. "Even now, sir." Pruitt looked at him with that calm, steady expression that never seemed to change. Especially now. The entire population of Haven gathered in the central square as the sun went down. 90,000 people standing shoulder to shoulder. Families, workers, soldiers, children, old people who had been born in the sealed compartments of the Starbound and had watched this world transform around them over the course of their long lives. Beckett stood at the podium. Behind her, the skyline of Haven glowed in the fading light. The towers, the green rooftops, the distant shimmer of the ocean. Above it all, the Valori fleet hung in orbit like a ring of silver stars. She looked out at her people. She saw Danny Marsh standing with his maintenance crew, still covered in grease and grinning. She saw Nora Hale holding little Lily on her hip, the girl's wide eyes reflecting the lights of the square. She saw Ethan Cole standing easy with his patrol team, his arms folded, his face calm. She saw Katie Grant near the communications equipment, giving her a small, nervous nod. And far away, on the southern wall, she could just make out the silhouette of Sam Pruitt, standing watch, as he always did. 7 generations, 212 years, 12,000 people who had refused to die, and the 90,000 lives that had grown from that refusal. Beckett took a breath and keyed the transmitter. "This is Governor Laura Beckett of Haven Colony, broadcasting to Earth and all human settlements." Her voice carried across the silent square, amplified by speakers mounted on every building. 212 years ago, the colony ship Starbound was lost in transit to Kepler 442. 12,000 colonists were stranded on an uninhabitable world in uncharted space, with no way to call for help and no hope of rescue. She paused. 90,000 people held their breath. "We took a world of fire and poison, and we turned it into a home. We built a city. We raised our children. We buried our dead. We planted forests, filled oceans, and cleaned the air until we could breathe it. We taught ourselves medicine, science, and engineering. We made tools, weapons, and art. We argued, laughed, cried, and kept working." Her voice was steady, but her hands on the podium were shaking. "We are now 90,000 strong. We have made first contact with an alien civilization called the Valori Collective, who have offered us alliance and friendship. We have proven, to ourselves and to the galaxy, that there is no world too harsh, no distance too far, and no darkness too deep to stop us from building a future. She looked up at the stars, then back at her people. To anyone who hears this message, on Earth, on Mars, on any world where human beings live and breathe, we are the children of the Starbound. We are alive. We are strong. And we are coming home. She released the transmitter. For one single perfect heartbeat, there was total silence. Then Haven exploded. The cheering hit like a wave. 90,000 voices crying out at once. A sound so loud and so raw that it echoed off the mountains and rolled out across the ocean. People grabbed each other and held on. Old men wept. Young mothers lifted their babies toward the sky. Children climbed onto their parents' shoulders and screamed with joy they did not fully understand, but felt in their bones. Danny Marsh was hugging every person within arm's reach, tears cutting lines through the grease on his face. Nora Hale buried her face in Lily's hair and whispered, "We did it, sweetheart. We did it." Ethan Cole stood with his team, and for the first time in anyone's memory, the big sergeant was crying, silently, his gray eyes shining, his jaw set, his back straight. On the southern wall, Sam Pruitt stood alone and watched the celebration below. He did not cheer. He did not cry. He listened to the sound of his people, the sound of 90,000 human beings who had earned this moment with blood, sweat, and 2 centuries of unbroken will, and he allowed himself one small, quiet smile. Then he turned back to face the dark horizon, and he kept watch. Aboard the quiet hymn, Thys and Vidin watched the celebration through the ship's cameras. "If this message reaches Earth," Vidin said quietly, "everything changes. When the rest of humanity learns what these people accomplished, when they come here and see this world, the balance of power in the galaxy will shift. The collective will not be the leading civilization for much longer." "I know," Thys said. "They will surpass us. It is not a question of whether. It is only a question of when." "I know," Thys said again. Vidin looked at her. "Does that frighten you?" Thys watched the humans below, dancing in the streets, singing, holding their children up to the stars, their faces bright with a fierce and beautiful joy. She thought about Beckett's words, "We did not build a home so we could destroy someone else's." She thought about Pruitt on the wall, still standing guard, even in the middle of the greatest moment his people had ever known. She thought about Hale, whispering to her daughter. She thought about Cole, crying without shame, because his people were finally going home. "No," Thys said softly, "it does not frighten me. It gives me hope." She sat down at her console and began writing her final report to the High Council. She chose her words with great care, knowing that what she wrote would help shape the collective's relationship with humanity for centuries to come. "The humans of Haven are not a threat," she wrote. "They are a promise. They are what happens when an unstoppable will meets an impossible obstacle. They do not break. They do not bend. They do not stop. They build. We should not fear them. We should stand beside them, because whatever comes next, whatever the galaxy holds in the darkness between the stars, I believe these people will face it the way they have faced everything else, together and unafraid." She sent the report and turned back to the viewport. Below, on the surface of a world that should have been a grave, 90,000 human beings were celebrating the end of 2 centuries of silence. The message was flying through space, racing toward Earth at the speed of light. Somewhere, on a small blue planet, 9,000 light-years away, someone was going to hear it, and nothing would ever be the same again. The Valori exploration ship, Quiet Hymn, had been drifting through empty space for months. Commander Thys stood on the bridge, watching the same dead stars pass by the same dark windows. She had spent most of her life doing this, flying from one lifeless rock to another, writing reports that nobody read, and moving on. The galaxy, in her experience, was a mostly empty and boring place. Then, the signal hit their sensors. Vidin, the ship's lead analyst, was the first to catch it. His 4 thin hands moved across the control panel, and his mandibles clicked together the way they always did when something made him nervous. "Commander," he said, "I am picking up a structured signal from the 4th planet of this system." Thys turned toward him. "Structured how?" Repeating. "Artificial. Someone built whatever is sending this." That got everyone's attention. Thys ordered the ship to change course. The planet in question was listed in the Collective's old records as a Class 9 death world, a ball of volcanic rock, toxic gas, and surface temperatures hot enough to melt metal. Nothing could live there. Nothing should live there. But as the quiet hymn entered orbit, the scanners told a very different story. The northern continent was green, not the dull green of simple moss or fungus, but the deep, rich green of forests, grasslands, and farmland. Rivers cut across valleys that had no business existing on a world like this. Along the coast of what appeared to be an artificially created ocean, there was a city. Not ruins, not wreckage, a city with lights, movement, and power. Vidin's voice was barely a whisper. "Commander, I am reading geothermal power plants, atmospheric processing stations, water treatment facilities, and fabrication centers. Whoever is down there did not just survive on this planet. They changed it. They turned a death world into a living world." Thys felt her wings pressed tight against her back. In all the centuries the Valori Collective had explored the galaxy, they had never found a species capable of reshaping a planet this hostile. It should not have been possible. "Can you identify the species?" she asked. Vidin ran the signal through every database they had. The answer came back fast. He stared at the screen for a long time before he spoke. "Human," he said. "The signal is in a human language called English." The bridge went silent. Every officer on duty turned to look at Vidin, then at Thys. Humans. The Collective knew about them. A young species from a faraway part of the galaxy. They had only recently started traveling between stars. They were considered average at best. Tough, yes. Clever, maybe. The Collective had never even bothered to send an ambassador to their homeworld. "How did humans get this far out?" Thys asked. "Their ships cannot cross this kind of distance. It is impossible." "And yet," Vidin said quietly, "they are here." Thys made her decision quickly. She picked a small team to go down to the surface. Herself, Vidin, a security officer named Kale, and a cultural specialist named Pella. They boarded a shuttle and descended through the atmosphere. When the shuttle doors opened, the air was warm and thick with moisture. The soil under their feet was dark and soft. Birds sang in the trees nearby. Insects buzzed through the tall grass. It smelled like life, rich, green, and growing. Whatever this planet had been 200 years ago, it was something else entirely now. They walked toward the city for about 10 minutes before the humans found them. 6 figures stepped out of the tree line in a tight, controlled formation. They wore simple body armor in brown and green, and each one carried a weapon that Kale immediately recognized as plasma-based. The Valori Collective did not have reliable handheld plasma weapons. These humans, stranded on a death world with no outside help, apparently did. The lead figure was a tall man with broad shoulders, sun-darkened skin, and calm gray eyes. He looked at the 4 aliens standing in his forest, and his expression showed no panic, no confusion, and no fear, just steady, careful attention. He raised one hand and his team stopped. He studied the Valori for a few seconds, then spoke in clear, accented English. "You are not from around here," he said. He glanced back at his team. "Lower your weapons. They are not hostile." The patrol obeyed without hesitation. The speed and smoothness of it told this something important. These people were disciplined, well-trained, not like survivors clinging to life on a harsh world, like soldiers who knew exactly what they were doing. "I am Sergeant Ethan Cole," the man said, stepping forward with an easy confidence that somehow made Thys feel like the stranger, even though this was a planet he had no right to be on. "Welcome to Haven. You are going to want to talk to the governor." Thys nodded slowly. "We would like that very much." Cole turned and gestured for them to follow. As they walked, Thys looked around at the forest. Tall, healthy trees with thick canopies, flowering bushes along the path, small animals darting through the underbrush. All of it transplanted, grown, and maintained on a world that had been nothing but fire and poison less than 250 years ago. Cale moved close to Thys and spoke in a low voice. "Commander, their weapons are more advanced than ours. Their soldiers move like professionals. And they turned this planet into a garden." "I noticed," Thys said. "What kind of species does this?" Cale asked. "What kind of species gets thrown onto a world like this and does not just survive, but builds all of this?" Thys watched Ethan Cole walk ahead of them, his steps easy and confident on the path his people had carved, through a forest his ancestors had planted, on a world that should have killed them all. "The kind of species," Thys said slowly, "that we should have been paying much closer attention to." Cole led them out of the forest and onto a hill overlooking Haven. The city spread out below them. Stone and metal buildings, green parks, busy streets, a harbor full of boats, and beyond it all, the wide blue ocean that human hands had made from nothing. Thys stood there and looked at what 12,000 stranded humans had built in 2 centuries without a single word of help from anyone in the galaxy. And for the first time in her long career, Commander Thys of the Vialori Collective felt very, very small.